Did you know that in the United States, singles don't just get one day a year to be celebrated, but we get an entire week? That is right, you heard correctly, an entire week to be celebrated, appreciated, commemorated, and embraced. Now, if you've not heard about this or you have no clue what I'm talking about, then you're not alone, because I am just now finding out about this. Now, I am not talking about the infamous Singles Day, which happens on November 11th of every year. Now, you get it, right? That 1111111. Not talking about that. And I'm also not talking about the infamous Singles Awareness Day, also known as Valentine's Day. Not talking about that either. What I am talking about is the National Unmarried and Singles Americans Week, and that takes place on the third week in September of every year. Now, the history behind this week is that in the 1980s, a group originating in Columbus, Ohio, they known as the Buckeye Singles Council. We had a whole council, y'all. The Buckeye Singles Council, they started celebrating Singles Week. Now, because of that, the United States Census then started to pick up on it, because I guess it started to become a movement and it grew in popularity. And so the United States Census started then from then on reporting on single statistics, or statistics related to the status of singleness. Now, because of it, then shortly thereafter, the National Unmarried Single Americans Week then was established or recognized as a national holiday. The funny thing is that throughout the years, what we see is that no one talks about this. It seems like, you know, the media doesn't pick up on it anymore. Hardly anybody ever, you know, seems to mention it. Now, if you were to research it, you will find that this is all verifiable and true. The funny thing is that for whatever reason, and we know this to be true, at least if you've been single for a long time, it's almost like there's a downcast, you know, it's like, you know, singleness is not looked upon as a favorable status. I think there's some room for us to change that, and that's why I'm sitting here now talking to you. Now, the point that I want to make is that for whatever reason, singleness is not the stage in life that we seem to celebrate. Now, story time. In 2014, I had been single for roughly a decade. We'll get to the math later. But at that point, before bloggers, or I should say before influencer was even a word that we use in our normal vocabulary, I was having the idea that I wanted to specifically write about singleness and start a blog and do all the content stuff. Now, at that time, I volunteered at an event, and I was working in a conference, and so I came across a very famous pastor. They were running the event, and so I happened to just kind of cross paths with the first lady, and so with the wife. And so I think I just wanted to validate the idea, or I really just wanted to validate the idea. I wanted someone to tell me this was a good idea before I actually like went full force into it. And so I pretty much just started saying, hey, you know, I'm thinking about maybe doing this or writing about this, and you know, and I just kind of wanted some thoughts or maybe some guidance. Heck, I don't know, I wanted a spiritual blessing on that thing. And to my surprise, what the person said, she came back to me and she goes, oh, like literally, she like deflated. And then she goes, oh, well, why would you want to do that? She said, you actually don't want to do that because you don't want to be labeled or identified or known as the single lady or the single person. And then I'm like, I heard her, and I half-heartedly took it to heart. But then at the same time, I was like, I'll prove you. Because here I am, about another decade has passed, and some years and some change, and I'm still single. And so what I've come to realize is that although we don't necessarily want to be identified as forever single, yeah, we're living in the season of singleness. There's no cost to that because this is very real. So so from that experience, I took on that really very early on, I realized that singleness is the one thing that people don't tend to want to be associated or want to be labeled as. And if you're really honest about it, then we also have to acknowledge that singleness is the one thing that we treat as it's the biggest problem that we have to run away from. It's the thing that we have to overcome. It's the season that we really want to shorten it as much as possible because we don't really want to sit in it. We don't want to sit in the uncomfortableness of it. And yet I am here to say that as a single person, it is a season for us to thrive in. And notice that I'm using the word season. I don't believe, well, it depends. A lot of different scenarios can happen. But I believe that singleness, it's a season, and seasons are not meant to last forever. Now, obviously, there are different types of seasons. And so singleness could look very differently for you than it does for me. Heck, there's probably different reasons why you've ended up being single after not being single. And so we kind of also have to kind of sit in that tension and acknowledge some of those things. But the reason I'm saying all of this is because if we're also very honest, we have to say that singleness is not very much embraced in our, in our churches. If it's not really embraced outside of the church, imagine even more so, because when the Bible from like the very front cover, when God said the word, it is not good for men to be alone, we take that to be truth. But I suspect and I believe that we've put a lot of our own kind of interpretations, understanding behind it, and we've sort of kind of completely diverged from what that could really mean for us as single people. Now, if you're saying, well, why is this even relevant? Why are we even talking about this? Going back to the United States Census, it was reported that in 2000 and I believe 2023 or 2022, I forget now, but one of those years, the statistics show that 47% of the United States population is single. And that is a staggering 117 million people. So, if you've kind of been like, well, it's very typical for single people to be like, oh, there's just nobody out there. Let me tell you, y'all, there's like 117 million people in the United States alone. We're not even talking about the entire world. I'm just talking about the United States. So just to kind of bring you solace and to bring you some comfort, trust me, you're not alone. Now, the interesting thing is that I also found that that's really almost half of the population. So, and we don't have to I'm not here to break down as to, the different segments within, the single statistics, right? Within the 170 million people. But what I do want to point out is that another way to kind of break it down, or at least the Pew Research Center, they've came up with a statistic that 3 in 10 Americans are single. 3 in 10. So, if you surround yourself with 10 people, you and 2 other friends most likely will be single. Now, it depends what circles you run, because if you have ever been like me, I suspect that, heck, in some circles, we can almost like say, 9 to 10, whatever. But you get the point. The point is that singleness is a growing statistic. It's people are marrying later in life. Typically, I think some of the research shows that before, somewhere in the 50s, 60s or whatnot, the median age for male and female getting married was in their early 20s. But now that thing has skyrocketed and people are marrying later in the 30s. Heck, some people are waiting way past that to be married. But I digress. That's not the point. The point that I really want to make is that we tend to not want to celebrate singleness. Heck, we have a whole week and none of us know, or most of us don't really know about it. But what were to happen if we embraced our singleness? What were to happen if we said, as long as I am single, I am really going to live on purpose, and I am going to live fully into the purpose that God has laid out for me. And I don't know if you've noticed this, but especially in the churches, we tend to equate singleness to youth or younger years. And so I believe that we do that for good reason. However, it is a disservice to all of us. Now, in churches, typically what you get is that you get the thriving family ministry, right? Now, families are really the foundation for society. So that's important. We celebrate it. Hooray. Then in some churches, you have thriving men ministry, and then you have a thriving women's ministry. We celebrate it. That is wonderful. Now, then we get kind of like the students and the maybe the youth, you know, the high schoolers or like the middle schoolers. You get the young people, right? The single young people. And then in some churches that do it even a little bit better, then you get like a thriving young adult ministry. But then what happens when you start to grow out of the young adult ministry? Because then at this point you're full adulting, but you're no longer in the younger years of your adult life. So you're like, I'm a full grown adult. And so at that point, then it kind of, you start to find the tension of where do I really belong and what is the group that I identify most with. Now, you might find a group of people within the family ministries, right? You know, some men and some women, and then you're like, oh, this is great, I have community. But a lot of times, you know, the priorities don't line up, because while they have obligations with family, you're sitting here as a single person, and then you have all the freedom in the world to do and be and go and you know, live your best life. And so a lot of times there's a little bit of tension there, and it's hard to kind of sometimes really connect for some of those reasons. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's legit. It happens. And then on the flip side, then when you get the young people, you're like, oh, well, I can't hang out with them because that is just plain, like, that is just creepy. And so in some churches that happens, beware. And so if you're kind of in your later 30s, heck, even later 20s, and you start to kind of, now by this point, you're like, you're growing out of those different stages in life, but you're still in the season of singleness. And so I believe a lot of times there's a lot of judgment as to why you're not growing out of singleness. But maybe that is just something not to grow out of, but maybe it is just something to kind of get through or to like thrive through. And because we tend to get lost in the middle of the church body, that is why I am creating Singles Unanimous, so that we can come together, connect, create community, and maybe find that one person that you're not promised, but might be waiting for you to find them. Because it is still true that it is not good for us to be alone. With that, I leave you until next time. Bye-bye.